Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. The world's #1 climate fraudster, Michael Mann, has headed south. He just appeared on the television show 60 Minutes in Australia. The show was titled The Fight Against Australia's Biggest Ever Bushfires. And Michael Mann told them that the fires occurred because Australians were burning fossil fuels. So let's spend about 10 seconds looking at Wikipedia to see if the claims are true. The fires this year burned at least 18.626 million hectares, which is 46.03 million acres. But in 1974, more than 6 times as many acres burned in Australia. The area burned, 117 million hectares or 290 million acres, is equivalent to the combined total area of France, Spain, and Portugal. The fires of 1974 were much larger than the fires this year, and this has been well established by the Australian press. So the claim that this year's fires were the biggest ever was completely fraudulent. They weren't even close to the size of the fires of 1974. Now let's look at what else went on during the low carbon dioxide year of 1974. Brisbane had more than 32 inches of rain during January 1974 and had their worst floods on record. January 28, 1974, Brisbane, Australia. Aircraft pilots reported on Sunday that the Gulf of Carpentaria and 5 major river systems swollen by record rains have merged into an inland sea 200 miles wide. And on Christmas Day 1974, Darwin was destroyed by Cyclone Tracy. 90% of the buildings in Darwin were destroyed, and the city had to be abandoned for more than a year.
Dawn, Christmas Day, 1974. Australia's northernmost city lay in near total ruin. Only 500 of Darwin's 9,000 homes were still standing. Almost 48,000 people were homeless, without food, water, fuel, clothing, or sanitation. I was one of the 48,000 that day. I remember being filled with a numbness, a feeling of desolation, even loneliness. This is almost the exact spot where I huddled under a pile of mattresses with my family on that night 20 years ago. Of course, the house is gone now, but when we pulled ourselves out of the rubble in the morning, it was like the whole world had ended. In the 3 weeks that followed the cyclone, the biggest peacetime evacuation ever undertaken reduced the population to just over 10,000. Families were split and spread across the country as though by Tracy herself. Those left behind faced the massive task of rebuilding an entire city. Whole suburbs were bulldozed into giant rubbish piles. Although repairs were carried out where possible, it was almost 2 years before the first new home was completed.
Despite the fact that people say it was too long a period, I think it's paid off in the long run in that things were done properly. It would have been a tragedy to have gone in and half done things and put them up in the same way as they were before, because the cyclone that came along later on, Max, would have done a considerable amount of damage again, whereas that didn't happen.
Will Tracy ever happen again?
If there's one thing that's predictable in this life, it is that nature is completely unpredictable, and it wouldn't surprise me that even tomorrow we could get a cyclone warning with a fiercer storm than Tracy ever was.
This is what the climate looks like at the low CO2 levels of 1974. Also in the United States during 1974, we had our worst tornado outbreak on record. On April 3rd and 4th, 1974, there were at least 148 tornadoes in 24 hours. 1974 was my freshman year in college at Arizona State University. Phoenix had their all-time record heat wave that year. Phoenix was over 110 degrees 18 days in a row. That is a record they've never come close to again. I played on the soccer team at ASU in 1974, and we would practice every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like Greta, I had just turned 17 in 1974. But unlike Greta, I was having a great time, and I didn't go around blaming other people for stealing my childhood. 1974 was Australia's worst fire season on record, and scientists were warning the world about a new ice age. They said, telltale signs are everywhere, from the unexpected persistence and thickness of pack ice in the waters around Iceland to the southward migration of a warmth-loving creature like the armadillo from the Midwest. The Guardian reported on January 29, 1974, space satellites show new ice age coming fast. Des Moines Sunday Register, July 21, 1974. World is getting cooler. Global cooling may be a cause of the devastating African drought now in its sixth year. There was a lot of bad weather in 1974, and scientists blamed it on the polar vortex and global cooling. Now they blame the exact same things on global warming. In 1972, 42 top American and European investigators met at Brown University. They were so worried about a new ice age that they sent a letter to President Nixon warning that it was likely to occur in about a century. And climatologists wanted to stop global cooling by melting the Arctic ice cap. Climatologists came up with some very clever ideas to rescue the climate, like covering the Arctic with soot. Stephen Schneider from NASA reported that scientists were very disappointed that President Nixon wouldn't let them implement any of their harebrained schemes. Now let's look at Michael Mann's claim that Australia can save the climate by shutting down their energy supply. China's emissions are 25 times higher than Australia's are, and China's building hundreds of new coal-fired power plants. Even if Australia dropped off the face of the earth, it wouldn't even offset the emissions coming from new coal-fired power plants in China. Michael Mann is traveling the world spreading misinformation about fires, climate, and the effect of CO2 emissions. The entire basis of the 60 Minutes show was fraudulent. The bushfires of 1974 were much larger than the fires of this year, and the weather of 1974 was horrific all around the world. Michael Mann is one of the most dishonest scientists who's ever lived. He's so bad that his fellow scientists describe him as a disgrace to the profession. Dishonest, bad science, and brazen fraud. So the big question is, why did 60 Minutes allow this brazen fraudster on their show? Had 60 Minutes spent 10 seconds on Wikipedia like I did, they would have known that this year's bushfires were nowhere near the largest. One could easily come to the conclusion that 60 Minutes wants the Australian public misinformed about climate. Historical evidence shows us that there's no reason to believe that lower CO2 levels would reduce the amount of extreme weather in Australia. Australians need energy, and they need policy which is based on accurate information. And they are not getting accurate information from the Australian press. Policy based on junk science has the potential to be extremely harmful to the people of Australia. So please pass this video on to as many people as possible. The public needs accurate information. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.